In this video we want to talk about some issues in production planning and start to introduce this concept of production planning. So let's talk for a start about inventory related costs. These are procurement costs, the cost of finding the right supplier for the goods that the company wishes to purchase, finding the right supplier, looking at the issues of discounts, bulk buying, finance, delivery, logistics, looking at all of the issues associated with the stores and so all of the issues associated with procurement and making sure that it's a smooth and straightforward transaction that's also efficient to undertake. So looking at order processing, looking at when the company places an order for goods inwards, that the order is appropriately processed and followed up so that the company is not surprised about the arrival date or the quality of the goods or the actual goods themselves, to make sure they meet the specifications that are on the order, to make sure that they are the right type. There's no breakages or no issues associated with that. Look at all of the shipping issues, how the goods will be delivered to the premises, in what format, and how easy will it be to move them on, perhaps into stores. And look at the handling issues associated with moving, the type of equipment that may be needed, forklift trucks, or what exactly is the product and how will it be managed from one stage of the delivery process into the stores, and how will it be ultimately stored within the stores. How will it be kept? Will it be in bins, or will it be on racks, or where exactly will it be? There are also carrying, or what we call holding costs, associated with inventories. Capital, for example, is tied up in inventories, and this is sometimes known as the opportunity cost, a concept that's widely used in economic literature. Now, opportunity cost in economics is defined as the cost of the next best alternative foregone, the next best alternative that we've given up. So if the company sinks a lot of its resources in, let's say, raw materials, then those resources are not available to the company to do other things. Perhaps have a greater marketing campaign, or a bigger marketing campaign, or update its computer systems, or some other vital task that it deems highly desirable, if not necessary. So the cost of the raw materials in the stores is what the company has not got. It hasn't got the better marketing campaign, or it hasn't got the better computer system, the information system. In which case, the cost of the materials in the stores is what the company has not got. The cost is not having the computer system or the information system. So, if the company has over-ordered on materials that are going into stores, then it's tying up unnecessary amounts of its capital in stock. Of course, we have to look at the other side of this argument as well. It could be the case, it's conceivable, that, for example, in a time of inflation, the company buys the raw materials at a certain price, puts them into stores, but let's say it's over-purchased. So it's holding a lot of its capital in idle stock, as we just said. But if, because of inflation, the price of the stock is rising, and it's rising, let's say, faster than what could have been achieved by putting that money, that resource, into a bank, then perhaps holding it in stock is a good idea. It depends. A lot of common sense has to come into play, and the best way to manage this situation is for wide consultation within the purchasing, buying area, to include the store manager, the production director, and so on, to ensure that there is continuity of production, but at the same time the right amount of stock is held, given all of the influences we just talked about: the opportunity cost, tying up capital perhaps unnecessarily, or the impact of environmental factors such as inflation, which may also be worth taking into account. There are, of course, inventory risk costs. Now, these could be all sorts of issues, and we've met these in other videos, but it could be that the materials that are purchased become obsolete because of technical progress or because of some innovation in the product or in the design of the product, so that the company in one time period buys a lot of resource, a lot of material resource, let's say, but subsequently finds that that resource is no longer needed. Now, there may be disposal costs, and the items may have to be sold on at significant discount to other buyers, in which case the company is lost. So that's one risk of holding inventory. Another risk is that it simply deteriorates. Depending on the nature of the item, if it's metals, then they are durable, generally speaking. Well, the non-ferrous ones will certainly go on, like copper, for example. But if it's a foodstuff or some sort of chemical, it may deteriorate over time. And that's a risk. By over-purchasing that item for stock, it doesn't move fast enough and it deteriorates, and when it finally is required, it's of no use. There's also a space cost. Some items may be very intensive about their space requirements. Some items may be very big. They may not cost a lot, but they take up a lot of space. So there's a balancing act to be done. Space is also a scarce commodity. Store space is a scarce commodity, and it has to be used efficiently. So again, carrying a lot of stock may mean tying up a lot of space, but tying up a lot of space unnecessarily. There's also inventory service costs. For example, checking the stock, checking it, maintaining it, or even sometimes when it has to be moved from one part of the stores to another. If there's a lot of it, it becomes a very big job. It may tie up a lot of staff and take a lot of staff time. So there may be a service dimension involved in the costs of carrying a lot of stocks. Then again, we have this out of stock costs as well, which must be considered. If the stores run out of stock, then production won't take place. The production department will have nothing to work with. In which case, customers may become frustrated, they can't get their orders, and sales may be lost. The image of the business may be damaged. So there is an issue there about trying to ensure that there's continuity of production, trying to avoid stockout, but on the other hand, trying not to hold too much stock as well, unless there are external factors like I mentioned earlier, like inflation, which could be taken into account. And also there's back order costs. Sometimes when orders are placed, the company may have to chase up the orders, and that involves a cost, or it may have to progress the items purchased into the company, into the stores. It needs to ensure that the items are moving, not just moving in terms of the transport from delivery, but moving from the point of delivery into the stores, into the right part of the stores, and the whole thing is maintained. And it's policing back orders to make sure that it's not duplicating orders simply because it's running out of stock. It should always check to see what orders have been placed and the status of those orders before any new order before any new order is put in place. Now we also have a concept of independent and dependent demand. Independent demand items are finished products or parts that are shipped as end items to customers. So these are finished products that are shipped out to the items. This is called independent demand. And dependent demand items are raw materials, component parts or sub-assemblies that are used to produce the finished product. So the dependent demand depends really on what demand customers are going to make for this particular product. The more the customers want it, the more raw materials and components and so on will be needed. But the demand for those components is dependent upon the final demand. The independent demand is the customers demanding the final product, which is shipped to the customers. Now, the objectives of inventory control. Well, maximize the level of customer service by avoiding stockout. Stockout means customers' orders become frustrated, customers become frustrated, they may cancel their orders, the company reputation suffers as unreliable. So try to avoid stockout. But also promote efficiency in production by minimizing the cost of providing an adequate level of customer service. So try to meet customer requirements, but at the same time not to hold excessive amounts of stock. Try to get the balance right. And given that businesses operate in an uncertain world where there are many variables in play at any one moment, it's a very difficult thing for the business community to do. But that's the ideal, to try and make sure that the customers do not become frustrated, that there's no stock out of finished goods or work in progress, that production is continuous and smooth. But at the same time, there's not an excessive amount of stock being held. So there's that tension or that balance which must be met. Now let's look at the total carrying and ordering costs to see what they look like. Let's do it on a small diagram. Here we have the annual costs on the vertical axis, ranging from lower to higher annual costs, and the order quantities on the bottom, small order quantity or large order quantity. Now, if we look at the annual ordering costs, if the company is placing small orders, the chances are it will not get discounts or preferential treatment from its suppliers. So the annual cost will be quite high. I'll just put the cursor on the screen for a moment. So let's say here the company is placing small orders, this type of size of order, in which case it doesn't get any preferential treatment, so it pays higher annual costs. When you tot up all of the purchasing that goes to stores, let's say, it'll be on an annual basis much higher than had it placed larger orders. There'll be fewer of them and there'll be lower annual costs as a consequence. So the annual ordering costs will have that sort of shape. We would expect it to be that sort of shape. The carrying costs, well, the more the stores has, the bigger the cost. The more maintenance it requires, the more checking it requires, the more staff it requires, the more space it requires. So the annual carrying costs will tend to be upward sloping, that green line sloping upwards. So now we have the ordering costs and the carrying costs. So the total annual stock cost is when you add the two lines vertically. When you add them vertically, we get this this line here. So if we simply put the cursor back on the screen for a second, if we simply take a point here, this point here, we take this amount of carrying costs and we add that to the ordering costs over here. We add it on, there it is, and we get the total cost. So Now we have a picture of total carrying and ordering costs. The minimum total annual stocking cost is that point there, which we call the economic order quantity. That's the amount that should be purchased, and there is a formula for calculating this, which is dealt with in other videos. The ABC classification, well, classifying inventory according to some measure of importance and allocating control efforts accordingly. So in this case, the stores appreciates that some items of stock will be expensive, maybe fragile, maybe needs special attention. Other items are cheap and easily replaced. So it classifies them according to ABC. A being the most expensive, the ones that the stores must monitor very closely indeed, whereas B not so closely, and C again less than B. So A is very important, B moderately important, and C least important. Now, classifying inventory items. Well, the ABC classification, developed by Wilfredo Pareto and known as the Pareto principle. First of all, A items, very tightly controlled, complete and accurate records and frequent reviews, closely monitored all the time by the stores. They are expensive, difficult to come by. So they need to be watched and monitored and make sure that the records are accurate. They are expensive. Items B, less tightly controlled, but nonetheless good records should be kept and it should be under regular review, but not as tightly as A. Expensive, but not as expensive or as costly as A. And C, this is the simplest control possible, minimal records, large inventories, periodic review and reorder. So large inventories generally held because the item is cheap and it's easy to get this item. So we can classify stock according to the ABC principle. A, very expensive, got to be watched. B, expensive but not as expensive or as difficult to come by as A. And C, easily found and easily purchased. So those are some ideas about topics in inventory management. There are other classes that follow on from this that you should make sure you see. But that's all we're going to deal with in this one. Let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.